Well, I think they are central to doing this. And don't forget, of course, Hamas was accused of being a so-called terrorist organization by the actual terrorist state of Israel. And they were punishing Gaza, supposedly, with a genocide, which is a reality. But what gets overlooked is that since October the 7th, they've been assaulting the West Bank continuously. And what Hamas have done in terms of making sure that it's the prisoners from the West Bank who are it's an act of nobility on the part of the Hamas group, because not all of the Palestinians in the Bank, certainly not the establishment, the PA, are that friendly towards Hamas. In fact, they are, as we speak, they be causing a lot of the assault and the damage to the Palestinian resistance. So the Palestinian resistance has a huge role in this, and they deserve huge credit. The way that they've been flexible, even though I think that they were fundamentally winning the war against Israel. Let's not talk about the civilian deaths, and of course that's what the emphasis has been. More than 200,000 people have died, as far as I'm concerned. The Lancet report confirms this, and now the official figures are catching up on it. But all of this time, the war has to be distinguished from genocide. Genocide is an great act of evil, but the war was an act for something which Palestinian resistance,
Right. It seems that we are having trouble hearing Mr. Abbas. Now, are you still with us? I want you to paint us a word picture here, because as you can see, the pictures are full of joy. They are showing that how Palestinian families are feeling. How does this media portrayal is differing or is different from what the Western media is trying to show us?
Well, actually, the image today is doubled in joy. It's not regular joy. It's extra joy, because families were crushed on Saturday. We have witnessed the tears. We have witnessed the cries. We have witnessed the shouts of unbelievement that the swap was paused last Saturday. But now it's all of this joy that you are seeing and witnessing. Of course, I wish I could even convey this happiness between Palestinian families to you even more, because those tears of joy and those really happy moments, those moments that families had longed for many years. Families were not able to even touch the hands of their loved ones. And for the last 16 months, we are talking about hundreds, not hundreds, tens of thousands of Palestinians, 10,400 Palestinians to be precise, under Israeli occupation, under Israeli detainment, without any news whatsoever to their families. And of course, what we know about the extreme inhumanitarian and their situation inside the Israeli jails is unprecedented. It's unbelievable what we are hearing testimonies from free prisoners. So when you meet a loved one that you have longed for, and you are in extreme fear for their lives, you tend to be more joyous even about meeting them. And even despite on top of that, I have actually made many interviews with the families of the Palestinian prisoners. They are saying that we will show joy just to make the Israeli part and the Israeli regime feel more depressed about the resilience of the Palestinian people.
Sorry, Naga, for cutting you off, because I'm going to switch over to our correspondent, Ahmed Al-Najjar. He rejoins us right now. Ahmed, I'm going to pose the same question to you. How does the Western media portrayal of these exchanges differ from the reality on the ground for Palestinians?
Well, most of the attention of the Western media regarding what we witnessed over these exchanges, processes in the Gaza Strip, over the constant implementation of the ceasefire ceasefire is focusing mostly on the state of the Israeli captives and using them for their propaganda, for showing that look at these humans taken in captivity, taken illegally, and ignoring the fact that in exchange for those captives, we're talking about hundreds and thousands who were taken for years by the Israeli occupation and barely getting any notice by this same media. And what the Palestinians are trying to do here, whether by the local media teams or the people themselves, portraying these joyful moments for the Palestinians, for these historical moments that the world witnessed since the start of these swap deals, to show the nefarious face of the Israeli occupation, who has no trouble detaining thousands and thousands of Palestinians and leaving them in inhumane conditions. And in these moments and these swap deals, these people are trying to show that their spirits, even after these long years behind the Israeli bars, cannot be broken, it cannot be crushed, as these families who are in a way also taken captives by the Israeli occupation, who held its blockade upon the Gaza Strip in a way, and these families are just marking these historic moments as they are anticipating for the arrival of their loved one, as they've witnessed over the past weeks, to send other powerful messages through these historical ceremonial events for Palestinian people of challenge and defiance for the Israeli occupation, who tries to put more shackles on the freedom and the basic rights of the Palestinian people.
That's right. Ahmed, I'm going to let you go. That was Press TV's Ahmed Al-Najjar joining us from Khan Yunis. Now let's bring back Sayyid Mohsen Abbas, journalist and analyst from London. Mr. Abbas, what does this exchange reveal about Israel's weakening ability to suppress Palestinian resistance? And how do you think this freeing of Palestinian abductees is going to affect the second phase of the ceasefire?
Well, quite clearly, the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu's had to be forced, essentially, he didn't do this willingly, forced into a ceasefire. He was forced because of the power of the Palestinian resistance. They were literally killing dozens and dozens of Israeli soldiers. The morale level of the Israeli troops had been brought to a low. Don't forget, every time they went back into Gaza, into Jabalia, wherever, they were beaten back, and they would say we've cleared it all up, but they would then have to come back in because they hadn't cleared it all up, and that was because the Palestinian resistance was being very effective. So let's first of all get it straight. This prisoner release is nothing to do with any magnanimity of Netanyahu. It's actually more to do with the fact that he has been forced into a position where he had to release, essentially it's going to be thousands of Palestinians in return for a handful of Israelis. So what it shows is another sign of Israel's failure in the war. And as I was saying before, the sound went a little bit weird. I actually made it clear that the resistance in Gaza had managed to force the return of these thousands of Palestinians who were detained. And of course, there's been about 8,800 of them who were, I think, detained since October the 7th alone. But there are still less. What I want to focus on is the fact that even though this victory has been achieved, and it has exposed Israel's weakness, it exposes that Israel cannot take out Gaza, it cannot control Gaza, and they literally admitted it by acquiescing to this ceasefire when they actually set off on a complete ethnic cleansing mission, and all their statements were about how they were going to wipe the whole place out, get rid of Hamas, destroy the tunnels. None of it happened, really. None of it was achieved, none of those targets. The only thing they achieved was killing hundreds of thousands of youngsters, women, and civilians. So this is not an achievement. But the condition, I think we spend too little time discussing the reality of life in prison. You know, they've been barbaric. Literally, these men who are coming out, many of them have been there for a very, very long time. We have to take a pause and say that medieval practices, horrific treatment, disgusting, despicable, inhumane treatment has been meted out to these individuals. They haven't even been, you know, given real trials, arbitrary detentions, administrative detentions, they call them, you know, across the West Bank, just picking people out randomly, no possibility of a real trial. They extended the emergency measures, which were there to cover up the fact that actually all they're doing is going and abducting innocent civilians from the public, because it's students, teachers, journalists, it's human rights activists and defenders. These are the kind of people they've been picking up and putting in prison for years and years. You know, the range is anything up to 44 years. Some of them I've heard that have been there into sort of 2 or 3 decades. It's criminal. But what they've done to them inside those prisons, the world must know. Because if one person gets a little bit of a knock, like the Bibas family, I think that's what they're called, the Israeli one, they're trying to pin that kind of thing on Hamas to say that they did this and they did that. The reality is that the Hannibal Directive was even killing most of these Israelis, and now they're trying to cover it up. But the fact is that the real torture, the real punishment, the real severe beatings, the real humiliation of detainees, the real dragging of people with heads down, kneeling on the floor, tortured, you know, fully tortured in every way, shape, and form. You know, it's monstrous what's been happening to these guys, and essentially there's no comeback for them. To the point where even I can say the G4S security group, UK security firm, I've discovered, have been part and parcel of this. They've been involved in even doing this to people in illegal settlements. They've been part of the prison service, the Israeli prison service. So the West is culpable even in the prison torture by giving them equipment, by selling them, by giving them security guards. These security forms are just one way that the Israeli prison system is also supported by the West. So our hands are bloody even on this level with these medieval practices. And I'll give you just one example. 2 prisons, I think it's called Sede Tamim, or Sede Tamim, I may have got the pronunciation wrong, but this is an Israeli military base which basically tortures Palestinians. 27 Palestinians were killed in this facility and 1 other. And they were killed through the most ghastly means. You know, they've done it with you know, keeping these families in the dark, keeping these people in solitary confinement, you know, literally torturing them, starving them, making sure that, and even sexually abusing them. So it's terrible. What these people have suffered, the ones you're seeing coming out, many of them will have had to suffer such monstrosities. And it's disgusting. The world needs to look into these torture chambers. They need to be shut down. They need to be harassed in every way, shape, and form, legally and any other means possible, to shut them down, because this is disgusting what they've done to Palestinian prisoners.
That's right. Now let's bring in Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. Mr. Gosling, it's always a pleasure having you on. My question for you is, Yahya Sinwar, the legendary commander of Hamas, gave his life on the battlefield in the fight for freedom. He was part of a prisoner exchange deal like this one, as we're witnessing. How many more figures like Yahya Sinwar do you think Israel is creating with its ongoing treatment of the Palestinian prisoners and its actions toward the Palestinian people?
Well, the interesting thing about Yahya Sinwar was that he was not so exceptional as the Israelis like to pretend, because there are literally thousands of people like him. I don't know if you've ever seen the film about the Roman Empire, Spartacus. The fact is, there are lots and lots of courageous Palestinians, and actually from many parts of the world, that part of the world, the Middle East, who are facing down the Israelis, and all it takes is someone to have courage to take up that role. Now, I'm not belittling his ability, but there is a big difference between the way that the Israeli government is run and the opponents surrounding it, and also I think it's true to say in Iran too. Russia is another country which is very different to places like Saudi Arabia and Israel particularly. They are very fragile countries. The political leadership have got very little support. I mean, you might say the same actually now here in Britain, because we've got massive protests going on in London by the farmers, the care workers. They're all saying, you, the British government, are destroying us. And so you have a fragile, it's like a kind of glass. It's so an ice glass peak at the very top of the political leadership. And just to sweep a few of those away. In fact, you know what? It is actually because, in fact, in Saudi Arabia, it is a monarchy. It's like a monarchy. It's very similar because there isn't really democratic support amongst the people for the leadership. So I don't think if, for example, the cabinet in Israel disappeared tomorrow, I think they would be very hard pressed to find people who would take over. And the same here in Britain, but it's not the same with countries like Palestine. They are more democratic. So even though there might not be so easy for there to be democratic elections and this sort of thing, the leaders are much more in tune with the people they represent in places like Palestine, and I would say Iran too, and Russia, another good example of a place. So. That's the difference to me, is that the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments are completely different, and they don't represent their people. So when it comes to something like a prisoner exchange, what we've seen recently is the Israelis blocking this prisoner exchange. Hamas are quite right. The Israelis were coming up with all sorts of excuses why they didn't want to actually keep to the agreement, and what they're trying to do is to roll it over. So in other words, to halt the release of Palestinian hostages, if you want to call them that, 200 or so being released at a time, and wait until more of the Israelis, even bodies, are released by Hamas. And so what they've done is they've got they will try to get an extra load of hostages released in exchange for the Palestinians. So they're cheating all the way down the line, and the only way they can get away with this cheating is because we've got a lying mass media here in the West that's incredibly biased towards Israel. In fact, we saw a brilliant BBC film last week all about life in Gaza, a fantastic BBC film, censored by the BBC because of the pressure from the Israel lobby. And so that's what we're up against here in the West. We're not getting a fair reflection of what's going on in Gaza or Syria, or indeed most of the Middle East, including Iran, at all.
That's all right. Now let's move back to our correspondent in Ramallah, Naga Hamed. Naga, are there any reports of further exchanges scheduled in the coming hours or days? Because as you can see on the bottom of your screen, 151 of freed Palestinian abductees were serving long sentences or life in prison. How about the rest of them?
Yes, well, as far as we know, in the next 24 hours, there will be, it's not considered to be another patch of this, but a continuation of this release, as the total number will reach towards the rest of the Palestinian prisoners will reach towards Gaza. And of course, we are talking about a large number. This is the largest patch since the beginning of these swaps between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli regime. More than 600 Palestinians is to reach towards Gaza. We have many female prisoners and underage prisoners who were abducted by the Gaza Strip. Of course, we almost 445 Palestinians who have been abducted after the October 7th. 2023. Yeah, almost another 100 of those who were serving life sentences and high sentences towards Gaza and others towards exile. Until this moment, this is the last in this phase. Of course, this is the last swap between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli regime, and all of the concentration now is focused on the second phase of this ceasefire deal, because it will be discussing the what is called the heavy files, especially those who were in detainment, we are talking about names that Israel once said they will never be able to see the light. Marwan Barghouti, Abdullah Barghouti, Abbas Al-Sayyed, Ayman Hamid, and Ahmed Saadat. Many of those who are Palestinian leaders in the Palestinian resistance, Israel said that they are a red line, but now they are actually being complied to discuss these names and to of course to discuss the possibility of their release and how they will be released in the second phase of this ceasefire agreement. Just let me excuse you to highlight one very important news that we have just received from Beit Jala government hospital. The medical teams have announced or has said that the Palestinian free prisoners, the wounded Palestinian free prisoner Qadem Zawahiri, have indeed reached Beit Jala hospital, and now he is being evaluated and being checked as his condition is described as extremely difficult.
Thank you. Now let's talk to Sayyid Mohsen Abbas. Mohsen Abbas, I had this question. Israeli media often refers to the hostages as slain, that Hamas killed them. However, just last week we saw Israeli hostages showing respect to the Palestinian resistance fighters, kissing their forehead before being released. How does this act of solidarity contradict the narrative being pushed by Israeli media about Hamas?
Well, the eyes don't lie, do they? And when you see emotional reactions, personal human relationships between an Israeli soldier or a prisoner of war with his or her captors, which is so intimate, because they were very intimate, some of those gestures, in terms of, gratitude and love and just the sense of, you could see there was a sort of rapport, a relationship that must have built up in order for that to happen. These men were behind masks, and yet they recognized them, and they were very thankful to them. That caused a massive problem for the Israeli Hasbara, because the whole point was that they were meant to come out and get the opposite reaction. They were meant to be able to tell the world how bad Hamas were, and how evil the Palestinian resistance is, and how terroristic they are, because that's what they are. They're proscribed here in the West, all of these organizations now. But what we saw and what the world is seeing is quite the opposite. They're seeing the reverse. And then, of course, they're comparing it to that ghastly description that I gave of the poor Palestinian prisoners, many of whom have come out raped, emaciated, starved, beaten, tortured mentally, tortured physically. The kind of techniques that we've seen on videos, and the world is seeing these videos of Israeli soldiers and Israeli, prison guards as they frog march, put truncheons into the private parts of some of the Palestinians. I even have seen horrific scenes, and those have all been verified now. They're not things which are they're not things which are conjecture. They're actual reality. So I think that this has all turned the Israeli Hasbara on its head. Of course, there's still a very powerful Anglo-Zionist media, as my colleague Mr. Gosling was saying earlier, that they absolutely correctly that there's a massive campaign even now to try and cover up these crimes, to try and dehumanize Palestinians, while at the same time totally humanizing the Israelis. So in Western newspapers, what you'll see is all of the hostages will be named. There'll be human stories told about them. Their parents, their families will all be involved in the interviews. You'll see them an in-depth analysis of each one of these Palestinian hostages, as they keep putting it. And so that's all done deliberately to counteract these scenes, as you described, of the kind of very fraternal, very loving exchanges that happen on the release of many of these Israeli prisoners. So you can see there's a big thing going on to try and win the hearts and minds. But I think the Israelis have lost that war overall. The world knows, the people know. The governments can lie as much as they like. The Western media can throw out as much nonsense as they like. The only thing they're relying on is that there's a large proportion of the Western public who are now more concerned about their own problems here, because of course the economic problems that are kicking off here are also concerning people a lot. So that's another way of distracting people from worrying about what's going on in Gaza, because it's miles away. And okay, so what? There's a genocide. I've got to pay my bills. That kind of attitude can still prevail as a priority for ordinary people, because it's their ordinary lives here. That's what they're relying on. So I think there's a big battle. The soft power war is very important, and I don't think that Hamas or either resistance, etc., have invested in a huge amount of soft power exercises. Although the way they've released these prisoners has given the world the opportunity definitely see that there's something going on which was positive. But that war is really important to win. Let's see. At the moment, I think Israelis are losing it.
Thank you, Mr. Abbas. Mr. Gosling, yesterday marked the anniversary of Aaron Bushnell, who selflessly set himself on fire for the cause of Palestine, hoping that one day his ashes would be spread on a free Palestine. What are your thoughts on his act of sacrifice first, and how do you see the current prisoners exchange deal playing into the idea of a free Palestine?
Well, Aaron Bushnell's, the way it was reported here, it wasn't reported much, but was a sort of head-scratching exercise as to what was he doing, why would he do it. Actually, of course, it was, well, an incredibly courageous act of somebody who feels at their wits' end when it comes to upholding international law as part of their military service. Now, there are a sizable number of people that when they join the military, they believe that what they're doing is they're fighting for just causes. Of course, that's going to be a bit of a delusion within much of the Western military, but this is, it's all about morale. And when someone joins the army, a soldier like Aaron, and realizes that actually they are the bad guys, they are doing the wrong thing, that they are killing innocent, they're helping to kill innocent people. I mean, the US role, I think, in Gaza is mainly an intelligence role, so helping them with targeting, helping the Israelis to jointly develop software to kill and target families of Palestinians, but that doesn't mean to say that those involved in the military intelligence side of things in the United States are not aware of their role. And I think as people start to think their way through what they're doing in the military, this can be quite a horrifying and frightening thing. So for somebody like Aaron, they have several choices. So one of them is just simply to leave the military. Another one is to just go along with it and try and turn a blind eye to the evil that they're part of. But you can be sure that any kind of armed force that fights like that, the morale is very low, very low. Mm-hmm. The only way to keep the morale up is to lie to people, to lie to the soldiers, and to try and convince them that somehow this is the right thing, God wants you to do this. So this is the role of Christian Zionism, a very pernicious form of Christianity, which is really no real relation to Christianity, which says that this is all God's will. Well, of course, the whole reason the Zionist movement started was because God wasn't actually creating a Jewish state in Palestine, and so the secular political Zionists decided they would do it because God was taking too long. And this is the only way I think that the Zionists, Christian Zionists, can bamboozle people in the US forces into really believing what they're doing is right. And that's quite an important factor in all of this. But for many people who maybe have not so much faith in this crazy Christian Zionism, they will be thinking, let's walk away. But what Aaron did was incredibly brave. He sacrificed his own life for his principles and for what he saw as upholding the United States Constitution and international law all rolled into one. So that's why what he did was so important, and that's why it was rather poo-pooed in the Western press, what he did.
Absolutely. Mr. Abbas, my final question, why are Palestinian prisoners celebrated as heroes upon their release, while Israeli captives are not given the same kind of recognition?
Palestinians are fighting for a just cause. It's quite clear after the amount of sacrifice and death and suffering and all we've seen rolled out, especially over the last 15 months, but go back 7 decades, and it's been going on incessantly. After all that, you realize that actually these prisoners are part of a people who are probably the most resilient, the most courageous, the most kind of stoic, the most honorable, and the most dignified people that I can imagine. I mean, to be honest with you, I've been, of course, supporting the Palestinian cause since I was a child growing up here in London, and to see them go through all this and still at the end, in the face of bombs, missiles, cholera, malnutrition, starvation, dogs eating bodies in the street. I've seen things like that. They've seen these things as eyewitnesses. The fact that children must have been buried alive, and God knows how many days they were under that rubble and died slowly. When you think about all that, and you realize just what these people have gone through, and these prisoners are a part of that body of human beings, which I would think represent the most noble among us. And I think that we all feel a sense of respect and a sense of humility when you see these people, what they're willing to go through in order to just make the statement about the simple notion of freedom, dignity, and having their own, equality of rights. I think that that's a big thing. And, it shames the rest of the world, really, seeing what they're willing to do. It's not just for a piece of land. The land is symbolic in the sense that it's the soil which feeds them, and they value it on that basis. They have an intimate relationship with the land, which is different from the kind of relationship that we have in the West or many other materialist nations. Their connection with the land is ancestral. It's where their family's blood is. It's where their flesh and bones are buried. It has an attachment which is kind of really heartening. It's an old school. It's a sort of almost a divinely linked kind of connection to the earth. Whereas what we have is much more disposable. So I think on so many levels, in terms of the lifestyle, the virtue ethics that these people are showing, all of those things that I mentioned, courage, honor, dignity, justice, the values which we all pretend we work for and love, most of us, but actually go against. Well, the Palestinians have shown this, and every time I see them, these prisoners are an example of it, because it's one thing to die and you're dead, that's it. It's another thing to get injured because you suffer for your life, all the mental injuries and the trauma that's going to go on. But then these prisoners go into the hands of the very people who hate them on a level where it's unimaginable how much they hate them, how fascist they are. And then these people are at the mercy of these tyrants, day in, day out, locked away where the world can't see them, and those monsters can do anything they like to them. and they terrorize them, and yet they go through it with dignity, and they come out of it, and they are still head held high, and they're proud, and they've gone through it. You know, there is no level of respect that you could give to people who have gone through this at every level. So, you know, that's why I think the world whose eyes are open recognize that the Palestinians are something special. They're the best of humanity at the moment, without a doubt in my mind.
That's right. Thank you so much, both of our guests, Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol, and Sayed Mohsen Abbas, journalist and political analyst, joining us from London. And with that brings us to the end of this edition of a special coverage.